people's lack of seriousness about Corona. We talked about this last night. I know I went on my soapbox, but I think it's very much a product of it's the Western world more than the other part of the planet. They just don't care. And what's the only real value is what, they'll put it in nice euphemistic terms, their civil liberties, but essentially the world is selfish. And that they may, carry the disease, they may infect somebody. That's just not important to them. Don't tell them they can't have coffee with their friends.
Well, I think part of it is that we've all.
I think it's true here. I think it's true by you in greater doses. And
I think in New York it's a little bit different. I think the New York specifically, they've locked everyone up so much. I'm going to quote something interesting here. Sun Tzu in The Art of War, he speaks about not pushing your enemy to the brink that they have to feel like they have to fight for their lives, or else it's a utter failure. New York locked everyone in. They kept everyone locked up to such extremes that everyone just has to get out, because for 2 months already you can barely leave your house. Florida didn't have that problem. Florida, we had some stay-at-home orders, but wasn't nearly to the extreme that New York did.
Right. Shmuel, you're up in a second. I want to just react to that. I'm sure that that's part of the psychology, but you only have that psychology when you feel entitled and train yourself to think that you're supposed to go out, you're supposed to do, and you're supposed to. A disciplined person, which is really what a mentor is supposed to be, somebody who recognizes there's a higher order and there's a way we're supposed to be, can train himself to endure just about anything. I mean, you realize that whatever we've been going through, relative to almost any other tragedy in history, is mild stuff. So, poor bubbalas, they're so cooped up, they just got to get out. Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, hard to be so sympathetic. It's all a state of mind. You can train yourself for anything. And I think, I think your analysis reinforces mine, that this is really it's a sign of the selfishness of the times. I got to get out. I'm cooped up. I can't stand my kids anymore. You hear people screaming that too. Well, develop some patience. Work on your midos. That's just not a concept for people working on their midos. Shmuel, go ahead.
Yeah, three things. Well, one, I had a pressing question that I was wondering if I could ask. I don't know if this was the beginning of share, but
no, it's great. We're doing Q&A. I also have a lot of unfinished business, odds and ends tonight. So the nature of tonight will be intentionally haphazard, but I think with some stuff you'll enjoy. I think I might have new material for some of you and old for some of you too. Hi, Yaakov.
Hi, Rabbi. How are you?
Yeah, good to see your name. Yeah, Shmuel, go ahead. Ooh, even better.
So a couple things. One, just I want to put in my vote for Koheles next for this year if there's a vote going on.
Oh, what a nice idea, Koheles. I did that, and I had a chavrusa in Koheles when I was at YU. I loved it. Yeah, and I always feel, I'm intrigued by that idea. I always feel that, Eden, thank you for your email, by the way. I took it seriously. But I always feel that, Shabbos Chol Hamoed Sukkot passes way too quickly. Koheles is just too much to take in one Shabbos morning. So yeah, I might be very interested. I also feel I'd want to be a little prepared for that. It's so meaty. It's so much going on, that we'd be groping our way together without me doing some previous work, preparation. So I'm going to consider it, but it's a great idea.
Yeah, and my question is, I was wondering the two parts. One, what are the rules and halachos regarding if one takes secular college classes, a person can't cheat. That's wrong because you're not being honest and you're not being righteous and you're presenting something that is not yours. But I'm wondering.
So let's find the proper terms. There's several things. There's what's called gnevis das, which is you're misrepresenting. It's a deception because you're saying this is my work, when in fact it's not, which of course overlaps. I mean, but that's an Issa D'Rabbanan. It overlaps with the imperative, the Torah's obligation, Vasisa Yashar Tova Yashar B'nei Hashem. You should do what's good and honest in Hashem's eyes. There's an overlapping obligation counted. The Rambam doesn't seem to count it as one of the Taryag. The Smag does count it as one of the Taryag mitzvahs. The Pasuk Mitvar Sheker Tirchak. You have to get away from lies. And like that, you can hear. I can go on for a few more. There, it's not the only issue. So hi, Dovi. Where the Shmuel's asking about cheating in college, something that is pretty prevalent. No.
For sure. At least during high school, I think I cheated a lot less than other people, but I don't know anyone who didn't.
Which would make you, by their standards, a tzaddik. I didn't cheat so much. Wow, what a guy.
It sounds so silly, but I'm wondering, do the rules of that come into play with regards to just like any rule that isn't enforceable, doesn't have the same guidelines? In other words, for example, if I had a final where a teacher said, so why you want us to proctor you guys and to like stay on Zoom, but there's no real reason for it because I know that there's no idea for me to know what you guys are doing. And the teacher said it. He's like, you guys, like, he said it's open books, open notes, do whatever you want, because I can't really control what you guys, like, you're looking at a computer, you could be looking at whatever you want. I have no idea to know if what you're doing is yours. I was wondering, does that then totally negate and there is no Geneva stuff because you could do whatever you want?
Yeah, it might. It might. That's true. And that's true with a lot of matters in the Choshen Mishpat. The general rule of thumb in Choshen Mishpat is endlessly complicated, but then there's a side of it that actually is very simple and straightforward in that if, with all the laws of monetary transactions, and there are many, if there's a certain local practice or assumption with money dealings, the halacha defers to that. If this is what's accepted, well, then that's the custom and that's what's expected on the marketplace. So people already come to expect that there's going to be cheating. Then you're presenting your work as your own when it's not, but then everybody does that. So then you're not really deceiving anybody. It's all twisted, but it's technically probably not as much of a problem. It may not be a problem at all. I don't know if you recall this. This is one of my, I as everybody knows here, I have my things. One of my, I think a really interesting pieces is from my early teaching in Shari Mevaseret Sion. Anybody recall my student when we were learning the laws of Gnevus Das had suddenly, he was coming to fix his life, and Eitan's grinning already. He was coming to fix his life, and he realized he had this big shaila. He had to try to make amends, and he was in charge of Mevaseret Sion, and he was going to go to college the next year. Now that he's making tshuva, does he have an obligation to write his admissions director of the college he's planning to attend that some of the grades that he earned in high school were less than honorable? Do you remember this?
Yeah, it's up there.
I didn't know. I'll try to abbreviate the story because we have an agenda for tonight, but I didn't know the answer and the implications. Look, it sounds like it's probably us. He cheated, and got to be honest, Davis Das, like we just said. On the other hand, you write such a letter, you inform your director of admissions. You could mess your life up. I didn't want to take that responsibility to tell him to be strict, so I took it to Rav Shulman, the Baradas Rav Telstone, and he gave what I found to be something of a surprising answer. He said that there really is a difference between cheating and cheating. If somebody's cheating to the point that he is decidedly not qualified, a practicing doctor, don't get any ideas, Yaakov, a practicing doctor who doesn't know anything, the first thing about medicine, so then that's dangerous. So then, you got to call the guy out and stop him and prevent any Gnevus Das and probably several other averas. But if it's garden variety cheating, so if Shulman said like this, he said, I came in with the question assuming the answers could be either mutter or usser. Mutter, like he's He's allowed to, you don't have to do anything, or you're not allowed to do this. He came with an answer. He said it's usher for him to write such a letter to his admissions advisor.
Why?
Yeah, and it's a very interesting answer. He said, assuming that he's not a chronic cheater, he's just like the average guy. He said, much along the lines of what Shmuel just intuited, this is what it's expected that people cheat. And it won't come as a major shock to the college admissions person if he learns it. But then in writing such a letter, you could set yourself up for the following response. Dear Shmuel, we found your letter of confession of your high school practices. It's candor, it's honesty, utterly refreshing. We don't get letters like that here in the admissions office. We're knocked out by you and your integrity. And really, we wish you best of luck in all your future endeavors. Signed your former college. In which case, like, you could be totally throwing your career and college education off track. Reb Shulman says, you don't have to do that, because again, if it's expected, it's not. There's room to be lenient. But that doesn't mean that you should do this lechatchila or that it's virtuous or anything. Quite the contrary. A proper Jew is honest to the nth degree, lifnim mishra sadin, beyond the letter of the law, when he is. The Ramban says he's fulfilling the mitzvah of Kedoshim Tiyu. You're being you're being a holy person. And he goes further. He says the Torah, he says this in two places. He has a different piece on each of these mitzvahs. He counts them separately, but they're overlapping. One is Kedoshim, one is the other verse I quoted, Vasisa, Tova Yashar Ben Hashem, you should do what's good and honest in Hashem's eyes. The Torah couldn't possibly spell out every application, every situation that you find yourself in life. But it expects, as much as we can as imperfect, flawed beings, that we should be striving for excellence and spirituality and holiness in everything we touch, everything that we do. So be honest.
The reason I'm asking,
and if you're the only guy being honest, great. So you're the only guy being honest, still be honest.
The reason
Don't
I'm
forget,
asking
there's plenty of room for everybody in Gehenna.
The reason I'm asking is because I'm unfortunately ill-prepared for a final I have in 30 minutes, and I'm wondering what the dinim are. Like, very limited.
Oh, cheat.
Right. Kedoshim to you. What did I go?
Do I know which final this is?
What?
Do I know which final this is?
Oh, yeah. Hi, Levi.
Hey. So it's that one?
Yeah, the professor said that I have no
Right.
idea what you guys are doing, and therefore, like, whatever. And I honestly, I'm at an impasse because I don't know what I'm supposed. I want to know what I'm supposed to do right now.
There's room to be lenient, and you should have great integrity.
Okay, so the second one. That was guilt. All right.
So I had a few things. If anybody has questions, I don't want to cut you off, but a few items, since we're talking about Inyani Diyoma, the upcoming Yantif, and so we'll start. The one thing I didn't get out, it wasn't fresh in my mind, and so I wanted to bring it to you. But hi, Gabi. We talked a little bit, we digressed a bit, and I was giving you some of the background of the Panovich Rav, one of the great inspiring figures. He was the one in the story yesterday, if you recall. You could do better, another zero. So the Panovich Rav, you remember also, I mean, he's really one of the heroes. He was a member of the parliament for representing Lithuanian Jews. That's what an effective person he was. His students, his wife, 9 of his children killed in the Holocaust. His son Avram Baruch Hashem got out. So there's a lot to say about him, but what I didn't tell you, and maybe you know it because it's a deservedly famous story, was, and I told it this year on the Shabbos after our Poland trip. Is anybody here? Yeah, Dovi and Gavi, maybe you heard. I spoke after on Leil Shabbos, I was the designated speaker, and I decided to talk about two of my heroes from this period of the Shoah, and I talked about the Sans Klausenberg Rebbe, who you should all read about, and you'll be endlessly inspired, and I talked about the Panovich Rebbe, and in the story that I ended with went as follows. He was on a fundraising trip because that's what the Panovich Rebbe did, and he did it so well. And he had this later in his years also. He needed somebody to accompany him. He needed an attendant. So he and his attendant, his shamish, stopped over in Rome, and it was a stormy night. And the attendant, after getting out of the airport, was all he wanted to do, of course, was get to a warm hotel and have a cup of tea. But the Panovich Rav insisted. He said, "I have."
Oh, he wants to
unfinished
spit on the
business."
arch.
Yeah. So he said, is anybody not familiar with the story?
I don't think I know it that well.
Yeah, it's one for the ages. Even if you're familiar with it, you should hear it and know it. Yeah. So he said, I have unfinished business. So instead of going to the hotel, they rushed to the Arch of Titus, which you recall is still standing 1,900 years old, right there in the center of Rome. Quick background, if you know about Titus. Titus is featured in the Gemara, not particularly in flattering terms. He was the one who did really unspeakable things. He broke into the Beis HaMikdash. He's credited with destroying the Second Temple. He took two women of ill repute inside, spread out a Sefer Torah, and did things in there that I can't tell you. And he stabbed the Aron Kodesh. He stabbed the Parochus, and Hashem miraculously made it bleed. Some of you will remember that Rabbi Yossi testified a couple generations later when he went into the treasure vaults in Rome. He saw the Parochus with the bloodstains. And Titus memorably screamed up at HaKadosh Baruch Hu and said, Locus, locus, you're a king and I'm a king. Come make war. And he said, he looked around, Hashem didn't seem to respond. He says, Aye Elokeima, where's their God? I don't see him around. He's nowhere to be found. And it's probably not a good idea to start up with the creator of the universe. He was taken down, anybody remembers the story? He was taken out by a gnat, by a little fly. And I don't know why he swallowed the fly. But he sure did die. He, they remember the whole story. It was he suffered the thing buzzing in there, to the point that the only relief he found one day, he was walking by a hammersmith who was steadily hammering away, and that apparently quelled the little critter inside. And so he hired a full-time hammersmith to go pounding away in the king's palace for the rest of his life. When he died, they cut open his head, and they found that the little gnat had grown to the size of a small golf ball. So the Panovich Rav goes under the Arch of Titus, and he's standing with his kapata and his hat, and it's raining, and he says, Titus Russia, Titus the wicked, Titus the wicked. He said, look what happened. You dragged my hapless people out of our land 2 millennia ago, 2,000 years ago. You led them into this exile. He says, you asked once, Aye Elokeima Titus. I ask you, Ayeka Hayom, where are you today, Titus? What became of your infallible empire, the Roman mighty conquerors? Where are you now? Where are you today? You know, the Roman Empire that was supposed to last forever. Titus, mir zenen noch du, avu bist du. We're still here. Where are you? So that's the Panovich Rav, somebody that you should remember. I did do drama in high school and college, so I had, on a burst of inspiration, I screamed out that last line. It was Leil Shabbos, and then I just sat down, and there was sort of a stunned silence in the base medrash, and then the Chazan said Baruch Hu. It was a good note to daven on. Always good to end with the Panovich Rav. That's one piece of unfinished business. We're heading down the line. I just counted my 49th day. Show of hands out there. Has anybody finished counting the Sphira for the first time ever?
I've never gotten through with the bracha, and so far I'm on my way.
All right. Are you almost there?
Yeah.
Oh,
a few more
Dove,
days.
that's so exciting. Shmuel, also, this is your first time?
I didn't count with a bracha every night, but I'd never missed a day. In other words,
Okay, that's huge. That's also
going.
huge. It is a great feeling of accomplishment. I mean, it's kind of what we stand for. Every night, all the the little steps along the way that add up to a major accomplishment. That's what you do when you make a siyum, a daf, a daf at a time, and then suddenly you finish a masechta. So I just counted 49 days, 7 weeks of the Omer, and we're heading down the line towards Matan Torah. And there's a lot of meta significance. I'll just mention the obvious, but it needs to be mentioned. I don't think people emphasize this enough. One point is that Shavuos is a nondescript holiday relative to the other holidays. It's a Torah obligation. Every bit as important as Pesach and Sukkot, up there with Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. But all of them, each of these days they have their own Masechta in Shas, right? Not our little holiday. Somebody once, when a Rebbe said that, raised his hand and said, no, Rebbe, you're wrong. There's Maseches Shavuos. He was really embarrassed about that line. Maseches Shavuos is all about oaths. Wrong Shavuos. But there really is not much, there's no mitzvah of matzah or sleeping in the sukkah or anything that's so unique to Shavuos. There's very little comment on it other than all the many laws you have to know about Yom Tov in general. They're not identical to Shabbos, but little distinguishes Shavuos in terms of the mitzvah quotient. There are a lot of minhagim, and the minhagim get a lot of emphasis, I think, because people feel they're looking for something. So, when you want to draw a picture of Shavuos and you don't have matzah or a lulav to draw, so they draw a cheesecake. But just keep in mind, don't get me wrong, I'm there with the best of the cheesecakes. It's not important, the milchik thing. It's a minhag. You should keep it, minhag Yisrael. But it's not the thing to be emphasized. Staying up all night, gorgeous minhag. Most of us know. If anybody wants, I can explain the background, where it comes from. It's from the Mekubalim of Tzfas. It originates actually not in Tzfas. It originates when Rav Yosef Karo and his chavrusa, Rav Shlomo Alkabetz, were learning. They stayed up all night, the first night of Yom Tov, and they were approached by the Magid, the heavenly voice, who asked why their colleagues had not. And the next night, everybody stayed up, and that's where Leil Tikkun comes in. Another beautiful minhag, staying up all night and learning. You don't have to do that, by the way. I think you should. If you have an opportunity, you should grab it, especially if it's fun and exciting, kind of shakes things up too. It's not the same old this way, and there's a brin in the base medrash, and you do well under those circumstances. If you know your limitations, great. Go for it, grab it. Unless I'm in derech, which I wish I was, I did last year, and I wish I had more opportunities. But if I'm not doing anything, I usually like to go to sleep and then wake up and learn all day, where I just find I learn much more effectively. I know Rabbi Elyashiv says much the same. I hit the 2:30 mark in the morning. My learning is of the hallucinatory kind of category. It's not so functional, right? So with all my best intentions, I'd rather learn effectively and intensively and sleep like a human being. Yeah, Shmuel?
That was my inclination, I was thinking that people don't learn as well at night as they might in the day, and at 4 a.m. You might be sacrificing more learning that you could do at other times. And
but I think it's highly individual. You have to know your limitations. I think it also depends if you're in a particularly nice setting, attractive setting with good people, and there's a real energy and that energy is infectious, and there's good stuff to be learned as well. And so boom, 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 you're going at it. Grab it. It's great, and I have to know your own limitations. I'm just an old geezer, I start to ripen and then rot. So figure it out for yourself. Everything should be l'shem shamayim. That's how you should gauge these things. Anyway, the things you should really be keeping track of, though, is this is Chag Matan Torah. We received the Torah. What are the implications of that? It's huge. I mean, to remind us, the Torah tells us what Hashem wants from us in this world. It's what communicates from the spiritual to the physical what we're supposed to do. And we got it. Ashreinu matov chalkeinu. We received it. And we're supposed to rise to that and celebrate it. That's Chag Matan Torah. And that's massive. And we should try to be learning it, all of it. We should try to live it, keep every mitzvah. And we should take that to heart. And this I mentioned, I think this is part of the Shloshi Yemei Hagbala, just like they prepared by having 3 holy days that they separated from their wives and that they did special spiritual preparation. I noticed there's a sign up. They reopened the mikveh in Telstone. I'm not sure it's the healthiest place to be. All those people so much in Corona times, but they made it free. So I bet it'll even more crowded. Terrific. But anyway, I mean, there is an idea of purity and elevation and preparation, and you should learn a lot. And Rav Wolbe has a shita that if you learn during these 3 days with greater intensity, everybody knows that what that means. That's going to be an individual call. But if you could do that, that's going to be a schooler for you for the coming year. So we should grab these opportunities and try to de-emphasize the stuff that's not central and important and emphasize this core. What a wonderful thing that we have the Torah, that we have access to it. We should, and give it some proactive thought right now. What would be an optimal way of breaking down your Chag? How can you keep it? How can you do it in a way that's going to be, the guiding principle? Anybody here from my year we learned Beitza? Yeah, Ed and Aviel, we learned Beitza, right?
Yeah.
Do you remember that? Do you remember the sugya in Beitza? Erev Tavshilin.
Yeah.
And we got to this, right in the third pair. So the guiding principle by Yom Tov is Chetz. Oh, and also Erev Tavshilin. We're going to be setting an Erev Tavshilin tomorrow, right? That's exciting. That's a nice opportunity to do another mitzvah, to learn all the things about Erev Tavshilin. So the basic principle of how you keep Yom Tov is Chetzi Lashem, Chetzi Lachem. Not quite in equal proportions, but part of the day is dedicated to Hashem, and part of it is for us, meaning we should delight, we should have delicious food, we should wear nice clothes, there should be a Yom Tov investment, we should have that feeling of happiness and richness, and we should have wine, and we should have meat. It's important to have meat with all the milchiks, not together, but you should make sure you plan the meals in such a way that you can try to do both separately. And but the Chetzi Lashem is of paramount importance, particularly on Shavuos, when it's all about the Torah and all about the learning. So try to give it some thought. What would be Gishmak? What can you do that would be would enhance your experience? Ayo.
Hey, Rabbi.
So that's a little bit towards the preparations. Another pointer for those of you staying up all night, it's a minhag to stay up all night. It's a mitzvah d'oraisa to say Kriya Shema in the night and in the morning with kavana. But I don't know if you're like me also. Maybe I'm projecting on other people. Maybe you're all totally functioning human beings and I'm a mess. But I get tired. And, davening Nate's after pulling an all-nighter, when it comes around to a certain time, I mean, it is among the longer davenings of the year. Ashkenazim have this minhag of saying agdamos, which I think is a practice. I think somebody had a sense of humor because they are among the more complex words and the biggest tongue twisters that you can imagine in all of our liturgy. And when you're falling off your feet and in a state of total fatigue, trying to get that out of your mouth, bashashta, it's quite challenging. But of course, the readings are so important. The Torah reading and the Haftarah and the Megillah that we're reading, which is what I want to talk about now, is so sweet and deep. And we could just spend forever learning it. Of course, the Torah reading is the obvious. It's the description of Matan Torah, but don't just read it, feel it. Picture yourself there. That's how you remember the Alei Shor. Rav Wolbe says, you deepen yourself in your emunah. And if you don't just learn these stories on an academic level, with all due disrespect for your upcoming exam in a half-hour school, we're not supposed to be academic when it comes to, Torah. So Rav Wolbe says what you should try to do is build a tangible picture. use your imagination to conjure up the rich images of what it might have looked like. And I know we're limited, we don't know, and maybe we're projecting, and maybe we're too, our thoughts are way too Hollywood when we try to conjure up the images. But you should try to get a real tangible feel. It'll make the reading so much more vibrant and interesting. It'll go into you. You'll never forget it. It'll be like you stood at Har Sinai. That's how we should be feeling. Every Yontif, the Maharal says this, should be not as if we're just reading about a quaint old story, Baba Mises, that happened to our long since departed ancestors. No, these are events that are happening presently. On a Kabbalistic level, we relive these events every year. So if you can be there for it, if you can be very active in conjuring the images, you'll do yourself and your Amunah a massive favor. You'll get closer to Hashem in the process.
The images of us receiving the Torah?
Sure. Imagine the miracles. What would it be like, by Matan Torah, there were Kol HaShofar Holech Umischazek. The sound of the shofar got stronger. That's the opposite of our experience of sound. All sound as we know it could start strong, but it all fades out. This is the opposite. What's the metaphor?
I mean, like,
Straightforward.
I think of like us dying at the end of the day. Like everything comes to an end.
Nice, interesting. I was going to go in a different direction, but nothing wrong with going that way. I was going to say that most of this world physical kind of phenomena wear out. We wear out, our clothes wear out, things rotten, things spoil, right? Torah gets more intense the more you get into it. It's the contrast between the fake drugs and the real drug, as the Talmud calls Torah, calls it the Samachayim, the drug of life. And all other drugs, you need more and more each time just to plateau, just to get to the previous high. Whereas the true drug, the more you use it, the greater the high, without any extra effort and without any crashing or burnout or any of the negative residual effects. And so the Kol Shofar Holech Mitchazek, it's this noise that gets actually stronger the further down you get, because the bigger Talmid Chacham you become, the more resonant the noise is. It starts to make sense. It starts to become powerful, and you become passionate, and it starts becoming interesting in ways that you never imagined, because maybe your Gemara teacher once upon a time was this Bleiweiss guy who just kept prattling on in the Gemara, and you were just watching the clock, and oh, Baruch Hashem, it's time for break. And he didn't charge you money for it.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah, I thought so. I hope nobody had any bad memories just now. But the good news is that if you persevere, if you continue to try to push yourself and grow, the Torah is unique in this regard. It gets richer. It gets more wonderful. You won't want to put it down. Whereas now maybe it's more of an effort to have to do it. It's the right thing, but you don't come to it naturally. At one point it will. There's a strange pasuk by Matan Torah says that the people, they saw the sounds. Ra'u kolos. What's that? They saw the sounds? That just sounds weird. I mean, talking about drug trips.
It means they perceive the sounds all at once. There's that whole thing.
Could be.
Could be. Sight, you perceive everything at once. Whereas sound, it's a series of moments all being put together. I think Rabbi Tatz.
I like that. I mean, you're onto something. What do you want to make of that then? What is the metaphor then?
So that Bnei Israel had got this perception of the world of, rather than everything bit by bit, being able to see everything at once and understand.
Great. No, that's nice.
Yeah.
Nice idea. You just thought of that now?
No, I think I got from Rabbi Tatz.
That sounds like Rabbi Tatz. Yeah. I have a slightly different variation in that we know that, the scientists say this too, but we also know this even if the scientists didn't say it, we only use a small percentage of our brain capacity at any given time. Some people much less than that at any given time. And we also know that sound is an interesting quality. Sound is potentially visible. It comes in waves, and intuitively we can imagine that if we could somehow do something to the world that would slow down the sound waves, or alternately if we could somehow speed up our vision to the point that it's at least theoretically possible, if not really realizable in our experience, you could actually see the sound waves. What would it take to get to that level? Take an extraordinary spiritual and intellectual leap. Well, that was what the Medrash, that's what the Pasuk and the Medrash is trying to convey to us about the level that Am Yisrael was at when they were at Har Sinai. The lowest person, the Shifcha Ketana, a lowly maidservant, was in a higher degree of prophecy than even Yechezkel and Navi, which means that they were totally here, totally in the moment, 100% of their brain capacity. They could see the sounds. Today in Shir, it's a depressing moment. I get a bunch of these last few years. I said over what I think is a pretty relatively interesting and easy Gemara. I then looked around at my wonderful students who have great virtues, but the following story will not reflect that. And I said, can everybody right now summarize in a sentence, nothing fancy, what did we just say? Nobody could.
What, Rabbi? What?
I'm sorry, what?
What?
Yeah, I was waiting for that. Good call, yo. So then, of course, Michael Stern brings up a new word that I think I first encountered last year, never heard about it before. It sounds so psychobabblish, new agey. It's called, I'm sure you know about this, called mindfulness.
Yeah.
Okay, so mindfulness is a necessity of this generation because it was a given in previous generations. I mean, if you went to Har Sinai and you told the Jews to be mindful, they would look at you like, what are you talking about? What else is there? It's like telling a person to breathe. But nowadays, you have to tell them to be mindful because they're just not there otherwise. Their brains are so fried. They've fallen under the hypnotic spell of their video games or their videos or, all that stuff that they're imbibing. So they're not real human beings and their brains are just not there. So they have to make a conscious effort to be mindful, which means be in the present. Am Yisrael, down to the last individual and collectively, we're totally in the present. They achieved an immense, to us, unimaginable level of prophecy and insight. So if we prepare ourselves, this is another reason why I don't like to pull an all-nighter, because when I'm really exhausted, it's so hard to get to that intense focus. And I want to be. I want to experience Har Sinai. We read about something even more dazzling in the Haftarah. What's the Haftarah of the first day of Yontif?
Haftarah is...
It's really exciting. It's the first chapter of the Navi Yechezkel himself. He's the Navi that actually, he began his Nevuah in Eretz Yisrael. That's the only way he can have Nevuah. But he continued, and most of it actually took place in Bavel. And it's a description, no less than the description of the Meiser Merkava. It's intense and intricate, as such a thing would be. The Meiser Merkava, of course, is the great mystical, Kabbalistic image of Hashem's throne, of this divine chariot, which is not really a chariot, and it's certainly not a throne, and it can't be reduced to anything physical. When the Rambam in the first 4 chapters of the 3rd section of the Moreh Nevuchim describes the Meiser Merkava in great detail, he concludes and says, now that you've heard this description, you and I still don't really understand any of this. So we read about that, and we know that the Torah takes us to the loftiest of heights, that we understand the Torah is given on every conceivable level. As is explained, there's Pshat, there's Remez, there's Drush, there's Sod, the 4 classic levels of understanding. Within those 4 is contained all levels of understanding. Its depth, its breadth is infinite. and we get a piece of it. We get to delve into it, whatever we can. I mean, each of us bring to it our own sensibilities, our own intelligence. Everybody has their own capacity for learning Torah. You realize that's one of the things that marks us as unique as Klal Yisrael. In Islam and Christianity and the Eastern religions, there's no equivalent mitzvah of Talmud Torah for every average Jew. But how fortunate we are. We can develop our brains, and as Rambam says, our minds can actually become mini versions of the Mishkan itself, receptacles of the Shekhinah. And we get that through the learning of the Torah. I mean, what a celebration. Before the reading of the Torah, we read Megillas Rus. And couple comments on Rus. Have I cut anybody off? Any questions or thoughts up until now? There's a lot to say about Rus. There's a question about she marries Machlon, he dies. She's set up in theory to marry Ploni Almoni, one of the greatest names in all literature. That's actually, for anybody unfamiliar, Ploni Almoni actually is his name, the uncle of Machlon, her deceased husband. Oh. The reason why anybody's not familiar with what I'm talking about, that's the generic term throughout Shas for Joe Schmo. Yeah. Right? Ploni or Almoni, well, he's an actual figure whose parents must have been particularly masochistic that day that they named him Ploni Almoni. Anyway, Ploni Almoni raises an interesting quandary for us because he knows that there's a prohibition in the Torah against marrying Moavim, and Ruth is definitely that. She comes from the tribe of Moab, and so he's concerned. He says, "Pen ashchis nachalasi." His concern about marrying her, when he discusses it in the 4th chapter of Ruth, he says, "I'm concerned lest I destroy my descendants." Rashi there says, explains, the concern is that maybe the descendants that are born to him and Ruth wouldn't be allowed to marry other Jews because they'd be defined as Moavim by their Moabite ancestor. And it was all a mistake, but an interesting mistake. His mistake was like this. The Torah prohibits marrying a male Moavi, not a female. Ruth was mutzur lechatchila. As you know, the story ends. She does not marry Ploni Almoni. They do a Yibum ceremony, and she marries his brother, Boaz. Baruch Hashem for that. Good shidduch, even though they have a long marriage, it lasts all of one night. But enough time to conceive Oved, the grandfather of David. And what was Ploni Almoni's mistake? So the Brisker Rav felt that there is a prohibition of marrying females, but it was a prohibition based on Svara. And he felt that the Svara right then and there was, since especially his own Jewish relative had married her and she was a kosher Gioris, that this Svara didn't pertain to the general prohibition and that this particular tzedekis would be fine as a wife, but that perhaps in the future, descendants would not be able to rely on that Svara, and they would have to go back to their own lineage. They come from Moab, and perhaps they would run into some trouble and not be able to marry the Jews. He was mistaken, the Brisker Rav concludes, and he says, that's okay. It's okay. You know, a Moabite woman is fine. Ruth comes from Moab. Chazal say David should always remember that he had skeletons in the closet. He also had ancestors who are not mihuma, not always the most prestigious, not the greatest pedigree. That keeps a person humble and in line, especially when you want political leaders. You want them to be humbled. Who were his ancestors? Who was Ruth's father, according to the Medrash? Ruth and Orpah?
Well, that was King.
Yeah, good. You know your Sefer Shoftim.
Eglon?
Eglon. Kol hakavod. Eglon, for those of you who are blocking or don't remember it that well, this is one of those stories that once you hear it, you'll never forget it. Ehud ben Gera, Shofet in the early period of the Shoftim, goes in to attack the king who's attacking the Jews anyway.
He loses the knife.
He loses the sword because the king is, well, how do we say this gently, rotund. And the sword goes clear through the king and gets lost in the fat. That's Eglon. Ruth's grandfather? Nobody?
Ruth's grandfather.
I'll give you a hint. A couple weeks in Parsha.
Lot.
Balak?
Balak.
Malek, what?
Balak, Melech Moab, the one who hires Bilam to curse the Jews.
These
Balak.
Moab kings really live a long time.
Actually, not so much. I mean, yes, there's some longevity, but not nearly to the degree of some other people that we know of. Because Rus takes place also at the times of the Shoftim. It's not so many eons later, but that's what the Medrash indicates, that she's related to all these and more. She's, of course, a descendant from Moab himself and from the elder daughter of Lot, and Lot himself. Anybody know the famous story? Actually, I don't know how famous it is. Do you know the story? It came out just when they published posthumously the 8th section of the Igros Moshe of Rav Moshe Feinstein. The story that Rav Moshe, he tells there of something that happened early in his career. He was called in to administer last rites, as it were, to say vidui, with an old distinguished Rav who suddenly took ill and was dying. Sound familiar? Anybody know this story? It's a wild story, and it's published in the last posthumous version of Rav Moshe's Chuvos. You'll make of it what you will. Rav Moshe tells the following story. This man was dying suddenly. He was previously a healthy man who had just a couple weeks earlier given a drasha in Shir, must have been Parshas Vayera, because he was talking about Lot's daughters and how they fled. They were refugees from Stone. They went to the cave with the best of intentions. They assumed, as the Medrash said, that they were the last survivors of the human race. They got their father drunk and had their way with their father as a way of propagating the race, the species. And the elder daughter names the son Moav from dad, Mi'av, and the younger is a little more delicate, discreet. She names it Ammon, our nation. Well, Chazal have some criticism for the immodesty of the elder daughter, and based on that, this older Rav that Rav Moshe was describing used that as the basis of his drasha and was going on about the problems of immodesty then and today, and the extreme value that the Torah places on tznius. He went home later that night. He had a dream. In the dream, 2 women came to him, and they were angry. One of them particularly. And in this dream, and they said to him, "How dare you criticize us in those terms?" He said, "Well, what would you have wanted?" I mean, I'm just quoting Chazal. They said, "Yeah, you took it to another level." And the elder daughter looked at this man in the dream, and she said, "I have you know, every single detail in the story was l'shem shamayim. You know that when I did what I did with my father, I thought we were the last people on earth, and we were restarting the planet. But my sincere motivation didn't just stop there." She said, "I also had some prophecy. I wasn't a prophet myself, but I had access to prophecy, that in some future date, there'd be a despicable people who would rise up in the world and spread all kinds of lies and persecute the Jewish people mercilessly. And one of the lies we predicated on a certain assumption that they call a virgin birth. And the virgin birth, which is a complete lie, it's made up, there's no basis, but these people would look for a basis. And I knew that unless I identified who my son was from, they would come and they would say, aha, a precedent. So you see, it couldn't have been that she was with her father. It must be that this child came miraculously, a virgin birth and a precedent for a later virgin birth." She said, to dispel that possibility, she made it very clear to everybody, to all posterity, and particularly to the Christian nation, that this was from dad, Moav. The man apparently told Rav Moshe the story, said vidui, and expired on the spot. Go look up the story yourself. Rus and Orpah are devoted daughters-in-law, and even after Elimelech and his 2 sons, Machlon and Kilion, not flattering names. There's some question about Are those the real names? There's wordplay in the Gemara in Baba Basra. Yet another Gemara in Baba Basra. Baba Basra is a good Masechta. Anybody's in the market. It's actually around Elimelech and his two sons that the Gemara derives that it's usher to leave Eretz Yisrael, and I can't believe any of you ever did.
Hey, I'm still here.
Don't worry, we're kicking ourselves for that right now.
I know. I'm sorry for the guilt right now. No, I'm not. Anyway, that's the whole sugya there talks about the Isra of leaving Eretz Yisrael, and it's based on what Elimelech did, and he and his sons died for it. And Naomi's left bereft. And by the way, I should qualify the Isra. Most poskim understand that the Isra applies to people who have, in one way or the other, set up shop here, who are here to stay on some kind of long-term basis there. And then they leave for illegitimate reasons. And then, of course, the real share that we could do on the subject is that there are a bunch of reasons that would justify leaving Eretz Yisrael. But Mikar Din, if you're here, you're doing a mitzvah, you're doing a number of mitzvahs. Every mitzvah that you're keeping is the real mitzvah, B'shlei Musa, because that's we're supposed to be keeping mitzvahs in Eretz HaKodesh, in the Holy Land, right? So that's they violate that, they die. Naomi is left bereft. Her daughters-in-law are loyal until finally she persuades Orpah to leave. Orpah leaves. Ruth famously says, wherever you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your God is my God.
Nation.
Right. Says Ruth. She's one of the great converts of all time. Chazal referred to her and Yisro as Roshe Hagerim, the heads of the converts, the Gerei Tzedek. And that's an estimable list. It includes the likes of Rachav and Onkelos and a lot of great people, a lot of great Jews, including people who I know today, who tend to be much better than the born Jews. Because if you're born to it, you take it for granted and try to do it kind of in a sloppy, half-baked way. People who convert to it, not always, but the people who I know at least fit this, they do it right. The story of Ruth has a lot of details. I'm going to wind things up right now. There's a lot more meat on these bones. V'zos l'tu'udah is a pasuk that's actually on every kashrus certificate. That phrase. There's a discussion of Yibum. There's a discussion. Boaz greets his reapers. Shalom aleichem. That's the basis of greeting everybody with Hashem's name. Lots of details, and the whole story, of course, is fantastic. And for the ages. Boaz, as we mentioned, is 80 years old, dies the next day after their marriage. Ruth begets Oved, who begets Yishai, and then there's David. Cut, little fast forward, Shlomo Melech builds the Beis HaMikdash, is sitting with his grand entourage. He's got sitting surrounded, the Pasuk says in Malachim, he's surrounded by the Sanhedrin, by his advisors. He's sitting on his grand throne, which has supernatural properties that are our whole class in and of itself. And of course, Bathsheba, his mother, is there, proudly shepping nachas from the kinder, and a bunch of other dignitaries, and the queen mother is there. The pasuk says, "Wait," asks the Medrash. That's redundant. Psukim are not supposed to be redundant. You told me Bathsheba's there, and you told me the queen mother's there. Why mention them? Why mention her twice? Comes the Medrash and tells us
That's Ruth.
That's Ruth. She's there shepping real nachas from her great-great-grandson. When you devote yourself to Hashem and the Jewish people, Hashem has different ways of rewarding you. One of the ways is actually even in this world, that you should see the grandeur of the fruits of your own Mesiras Nefesh, of your own investment in the Jewish people, that you should live to see the great Shlomo building the Beis HaMikdash, and realizing the dream of all of creation to create a world, create a home where the Shekhinah could reside. That was great nachas for her, and a fine ending to her book. These are some of the themes. Questions? Okay, I talked it out.
I heard Roy Lieber also talked about the book. We also talked about Ruth yesterday, and I hit on some of these points.
Wow, I'm redundant.
He also he brought how
we actually don't check. We don't compare notes these days, particularly. I don't get to see Rabbi Lieber as much as I want to. I do get to see Rabbi Pittem and Rabbi Greenwald and Rabbi Bannon and Rabbi Borger, but almost not so many others.
He contrasted. He did contrast. He said that he contrasted. So on one opinion, Boaz died the next day because he finished his job. Another opinion is that apparently he actually made it by one day. If he had waited the day, he would have died. He wouldn't have married us. He would have completely missed that opportunity.
Right.
Well, he contrasts that to David HaMelech. He contrasted David HaMelech with Bathsheba, and he knew his great grandfather Boaz only made it by one day, so he decided to jump on it immediately when that was absolutely the wrong thing to do.
Oh, wow. Wow.
But that he had that shtickle contrast situations.
Thanks for sharing that. That's great. Before everybody checks out, I'm still considering what our next project is. We may do some short units next week. We'll pick up on Sunday night, B'ezras Hashem. And what's in the running right now, Shmuel just made a fine recommendation of Koheles, which intrigues me. I know that I think Shammai suggested we do some Ramchal, which also intrigues me. Other suggestions I floated yesterday, including a piece on Breslov I've never given before, although I have it ready to go. I've had it for some years. I just haven't set it over formally. I have this newer piece on the transgender topic, which I think is very a lot of worthy aspects to discuss there. What else did we say? Anything else in the running?
The trolley question.
The trolley question.
The trolley question, but that I know that's not going to be ready. I won't have time to prepare that. Meaning, I know exactly what I need to do. I need to look at the Chazon Ish. I need to look at the Chidush Yarim. I have my sources, but I don't have I don't have a prepared shiur, and I will. B'ezras Hashem. So we'll I hope to get to that and do it properly.
Can I add one more short session?
Yeah, great.
The J-man in Christianity.
What was the changing man?
J-man.
JC
J-man.
Oh, the J-man and Christianity. I'm happy to do that. I because a lot of us are really close, and a lot of you know my material. It's one of those things that I've been doing for years.
Yeah,
it's a specialty
exactly.
of mine. I just wouldn't want. I'm trying to think of fresh things that we would not have learned together in the past. But if there's a consensus that you want to review some of the Christian material, I'm always adding to it. I have some new ideas. But invariably, I'm going to by repeating myself, and maybe that's me boring for some people.
I would love that, honestly, to learn all that.
Yeah. Just a general reaction. Does anybody who knows me really well, Dafka doesn't want me to do Christianity again?
Not particularly object to it.
No objection. Eitan, you prefer I did one of the newer, fresher topics.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good.
I think I would.
I actually just heard
agree with that.
I actually just heard your shiur on Christianity 2 days ago.
That's wild. Okay. Hi, Yitzchak Chaim.
Is that Yitzchak Chaim? No way.
I mean, you can. The truth is, I'm always updating my material, but a lot of it, even though the lectures are pretty old, but you can still get the gist of it in the recorded sessions from years ago. Is anybody not have access to that? If you should want. Yitzchak Chaim, thanks for your note. You're going to guide me. I'm happy to get WhatsApp if I can. I'm pretty inept about figuring out how to put it on this laptop. Callie's version just I couldn't deal with it, and I just haven't, so I haven't had it for a year. But I'm happy to look into renewing it or figuring out some way. I would love to be more connected. I know I'm one of the holdouts, Rebbis, who's not as connected as I should be, but. We'll talk. We'll be in touch. I'll stay on the line if anybody wants to schmooze. And for the rest of you, a Chag Sameach and a good Shabbos, and I'll see you on Sunday.